Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're embarking on an exploration that really challenges one of our most fundamental assumptions. The nature of our separate selves and the reality we think we inhabit. What if, at its core, our perception of a distinct me and a separate world? What if it's just a kind of masterful illusion? Our mission today is to dive deep into non-dualism, this really profound idea that there's no inherent fundamental separation between you and the world, between subject and object. And to help us unpack this, we've gathered some truly insightful sources. We're drawing on the wisdom of philosophers like Jay Garfield and Michel Bitbol, and we're intertwining their perspectives with some really cutting-edge neuroscience from researchers like Judson Brewer, Antoine Lutz, Richard Davidson, and also the contemplative insights from Zoran Josipovic. But this isn't just about abstract theory, right? It's about exploring how understanding non-duality might actually transform your relationship to suffering, maybe deepen your joy, and help you live a more integrated and expansive life. So to begin, let's dive right into this bold assertion that our very sense of self might be an illusion. And for this, we really need to turn to the insights of philosopher Jay Garfield. His work kind of sets the stage perfectly. Garfield's core idea is, well, it's pretty revolutionary. The self isn't what it seems, it's an illusion. Now, he's very careful about what he means by illusion. This isn't like a hallucination, seeing something that isn't there at all, like a mirage. Instead, drawing from Indian philosophy, an illusion is something that exists in one way but appears in another.
Right, like a magic trick. The coin doesn't vanish, it just looks like it does.
Exactly. And the illusion of self, in that sense, is really pervasive. It shapes how we see our own independence, our relationship to everything. It's not really a flaw, just how our minds usually work.
And he points to what he calls the chief cognitive illusion.
Which is?
It's that deeply ingrained belief that each of us is an independent self that stands over and against a world as a subject or an agent. We really feel like this singular self-contained I looking out at a separate world, right? Like we're distinct from it all.
Almost like a puppeteer pulling the strings of our body and mind.
Yeah, something like that. But Garfield argues this powerful feeling, this illusion, is a major source of what he calls moral incompetence and profound confusion about who we are and where we fit.
Moral incompetence, that's a strong phrase. It really makes you stop and think, what does he mean by that? How can our sense of self lead there?
Well, think about it. If I truly believe I'm an entirely separate, independent thing, completely distinct from you, from everyone else, from the planet, doesn't it become easier to justify selfishness, to ignore other people's suffering, to, exploit resources without feeling connected to the consequences?
Yeah, I can see that. It creates distance.
Exactly. This belief in a separate I fosters an us versus them mentality, whether it's between people, groups, even humanity versus the environment. It kind of undermines our natural empathy because it puts up these artificial walls where maybe none really exist. It's a deep confusion about our interconnectedness.
That makes a lot of sense. And that leads directly into what Garfield calls self-alienation. Sounds pretty dramatic. What's he getting at?
Self-alienation for Garfield is this profound confusion about who and what we are. It's when our idea of ourself is totally at odds with our actual mode of existence. The classic example he gives is seeing yourself as a pure subject, wholly separate from the world of objects.
Like that idea of an eye in the visual field that sees everything but itself.
Precisely. It ignores its own place within that field. So self-alienation means we're basically mistaken about our own nature. We live as if we're outside observers looking in on reality, when actually we're completely embedded in it, a participant, not just an observer.
He uses a metaphor to really drive this home, doesn't he? The serpent in the wall.
Yes. That refers to our atavistic gut belief, this really deep, primal, almost pre-rational conviction that we are something that stands behind our minds and bodies, that possesses them rather than being them.
Like saying I have a mind or I have a body.
Exactly like that. As if the I is a separate owner or operator. This deep-seated belief, this constant sense that there's a permanent, unchanging me inside, that's the illusion. And it's what Buddhist analysis and good Western philosophy, too, tries to deconstruct. It's the serpent, because it's this hidden, ingrained belief that subtly poisons our perception and leads to suffering, often without us even realizing it's the source.
And you can really see this playing out in our everyday emotions. Garfield points out things like pride, shame, anger. They're so powerful because they bring up the idea of the self.
They involve egocentric attachment. We don't just feel bad about an action. We feel shame for ourselves for that I that messed up or felt inadequate.
Or the I that gets defensive when challenged.
Yeah. These emotions are tangled up with this illusory, grasping sense of a solid self. They almost feed the serpent, reinforcing its apparent reality.
And this ties into his point that the self isn't simple or singular, right? Our experience is always changing.
Absolutely. Our thoughts, feelings, sensations, actions, they're plural. They're in constant flux. Think about your own experience right now, shifting moment to moment. Yet despite all this change and complexity, we cling to this illusion of a constant singular I, a fixed identity that stays the same.
But that perceived unchanging identity.
That's the illusion, according to Garfield. The I you were 5 minutes ago isn't exactly the same I you are now. We're more like a continuous process, a flowing river, not a static rock.
What's really fascinating here is that this challenge to the idea of a fixed self, it's not new, is it? It has deep historical roots.
Not at all. It echoes across centuries in both Eastern and Western thought. And Michel Bitbol helps us see these connections, especially when discussing philosophers like David Hume and Immanuel Kant. Take David Hume, the 18th century Scottish skeptic. He really went after not just the intrinsic existence of external bodies, but also the intrinsic existence of the self.
What did he find when he looked inward?
He argued that when you actually introspect, you don't find some permanent, unchanging self. What you find is just a flux of perceptions, feelings, experiences, a constantly changing stream. There's no permanent self holding it all together. He famously described the mind as nothing but a bundle or collection of different perceptions which succeed each other with inconceivable rapidity and are in a perpetual flux and movement. No core entity, just the flow itself.
Wow. And he even questioned causality.
He did. He saw causality not as some inherent necessity in the world, like A must cause B, but more as a constant conjunction of objects that we observe, plus a determination of the mind. In other words, that feeling of necessity that must is something our minds impose based on past experience. We see B follow A repeatedly, and our mind projects necessity onto it. It's a mental habit, not necessarily a feature of reality itself.
That's a radical dismantling of common sense. But how does that square with modern science, where we often do find causal mechanisms? Is Hume saying it's all just in our heads?
That's a tension, and it really leads us to Kant. Hume's skepticism woke Immanuel Kant from his dogmatic slumbers, as Kant himself put it. Kant realized Hume was onto something crucial. Maybe our minds aren't just passively receiving reality, maybe they actively structure our experience.
Yes.
Well, Kant saw that distinctions we take for granted, like the difference between a right and left hand, aren't intrinsic properties of things in themselves. They're phenomenal external distinctions. They arise from our way of perceiving, our spatial intuition. Our reason might think it's revealing things as they are, but Kant argued it operates within limits, shaped by our innate mental structures like space, time, and categories like causality. We can only know things as they appear to us, phenomena, not as they are in themselves.
So Kant shifts from thinking about independent things to relationships.
Exactly. Bitbol explains Kant's shift. We don't directly access external objects as they are in themselves. What we perceive as objects is really a system of relations that gets stabilized by our minds. This consistency gives us the idea of permanent objects. What we call substance, then, isn't some underlying essence, but just a stable bundle of relations, a recurring pattern we identify.
So even big concepts like self or world.
For Kant, even concepts like ego, world, God, these are idols of reason. They're mental extrapolations, attempts to grasp ultimate reality that are completely wrong if taken literally as descriptions of things in themselves. But crucially, they still serve a vital function for our mind. They help organize our experience and guide our actions and inquiries, even if they aren't objectively true in the way we might think.
How are they useful fictions, then? Can you give an example?
Sure. Take the self. Even if it's ultimately an illusion, the idea of a consistent you who learns, makes choices, feels regrets, sets goals, that's incredibly useful for navigating life, right? It allows for responsibility, personal growth, planning. Similarly, thinking of the world as a stable, objective place allows us to do science, communicate, build things. These concepts provide a working framework, like rules of a game, even if the ultimate reality is more fluid and relational. They let us function.
Okay, that makes sense. And what about freedom? If everything is phenomena governed by laws, where does free will fit in for Kant?
That's where Kant gets really nuanced. Bitbol explains that while theoretical reason, looking from the outside, sees phenomena governed by natural laws, implying determinism, from the inner standpoint of the actor-agent, we experience ourselves as free. It's not a contradiction, but two different valid perspectives. One is the scientific description from the outside. The other is the lived experience of choosing from the inside. Both are true within their own domains.
And Michel Bitbol brings us right back to the brain and consciousness debate.
He does. He asks this really pointed question. Which one of these two sides is more important? My brain or my consciousness? He grants that, okay, consciousness seems to need a brain, but then he flips it. Without my consciousness, I would not even be able to say brain.
That's such a simple but profound point. The very concept, the word brain, arises within consciousness.
Exactly. Bitbol argues that science, while amazing, has this inherent blind spot. It often overlooks or minimizes the role of the experiencing subject, the consciousness that is doing the science in the first place. He's not knocking science. He's saying we need to remember that our direct first-person experience isn't just some side effect. It's the fundamental ground. It's primary. Everything else, including scientific models, is known through it.
Okay, so we have this rich philosophical groundwork challenging the separate self and highlighting the role of consciousness. How do these ideas actually show up when we look at the brain? This is where it gets really interesting with the science, right?
Absolutely. Let's bridge this now with the work of Judson Brewer and Antoine Lutz. They bring these ideas into the lab.
Brewer's work with fMRI and the default mode network, the DMN, is fascinating. What does he find?
He finds that in experienced meditators, the DMN, which includes areas like the posterior cingulate and medial prefrontal cortex, actually gets quieter. It deactivates during certain types of meditation.
And why is that significant?
It's huge because the DMN is heavily linked to self-referential processing. It's basically the brain's me network, active when we're thinking about ourselves, lost in thought, mind-wandering, ruminating about the past, worrying about the future.
So when it quiets down,
Our strong sense of a separate narrative I seems to lessen. Meditators often report feeling less caught up in their thoughts, more present, sometimes even experiencing a sense of unity or boundlessness. It's like the brain's internal monologue, the constant me show, gets turned down.
the me show, I like that. And Brewer connects this self-network to the brain's reward system too, right? How does that work?
Yeah, this is crucial for understanding habits and addiction. He shows how the reward system involving dopamine release in areas like the nucleus accumbens gets activated not just by things like drugs or food, but also by self-related thoughts and validation. Think about getting a like on social media. That little hit feels good. It reinforces the behavior. Brewer calls social media weapons of mass distraction, partly because they tap into this loop, constantly reinforcing self-related activity through intermittent rewards. We get hooked on validating the me.
It's kind of scary how easily that happens, and he connects this cycle to an ancient concept, doesn't he? Samsara.
He does. Samsara, often translated as endless wandering. When we keep seeking external things, food, drugs, likes, distractions to soothe internal discomfort without addressing the root cause, we get stuck in this loop. We wander endlessly, looking for the next fix. He quotes Alan Watts. The ego, the self which he believes himself to be, is nothing but a pattern of habits. This cycle of craving and clinging, upadana in Buddhist terms, is, as Brewer says, the heart of addiction. We're trapped by our habits, reinforcing the very self that feels lacking.
But there's a way out. He mentions a Buddhist sutra about suffering being a springboard.
Yes, it's a less common one, suggesting suffering isn't just a dead end. If we understand how we suffer, how these habit loops work, it gives us confidence or faith that we can change. By applying appropriate attention, Yansu Manasikara, we can shift our focus away from the obsession with I and self and distraction and towards, well, a less me-centric mode of being. It's about using the understanding of suffering as motivation to pay attention differently.
Paying attention differently, that sounds like where Antoine Lutz's work comes in, with decentering.
Exactly. Decentering, or cognitive diffusion, is central. Lutz defines it as the capacity to create some distance with your experience. It means you can observe your thoughts and feelings without being totally swept away by them. You can see them as just something mental, transient events passing through awareness, rather than identifying with them completely.
So you see the thought, I'm anxious, but you don't have to be the anxiety.
Precisely. You recognize it as a mental event. And research shows this ability to decenter helps protect against things like depression relapse, gives you space, choice.
How does this apply to something really physical, like pain?
Lutz's studies show something remarkable. A sensory-affective uncoupling of pain, especially in experienced meditators. This means they can separate the raw physical sensation of pain, the intensity from the emotional reaction to it, the unpleasantness, the suffering part.
So the sensation might be there, but it doesn't hurt as much emotionally.
Right. The suffering component is reduced. And this is amplified with expertise. Expert meditators show less anticipation of pain in brain areas like the anterior insula, which processes that emotional, how does this feel aspect. And even though their brain might respond strongly during the pain, it recovers much faster afterwards. They don't seem to brace against it or get stuck in the unpleasantness in the same way.
Wow, and he showed something similar with cravings, too.
Yeah, with food images. They compared an immersed attitude, being totally caught up, grasping, believing the craving is reality, versus a mindful attitude, suspending judgment, just observing the craving as a mental event. The immersed state led to more salivation, more bias towards the food. The mindful state reduced those responses. It shows how our mental stance, our relationship to the craving, can actually change the physical and behavioral reaction.
That's fascinating. What about the monkey mind, then? That constant chatter. Is the goal just to shut it up?
Not necessarily, according to Lutz, referencing Mingyur Rinpoche. The monkey mind isn't inherently bad. It depends on your relationship with it. If it controls you, drags you around, sure, that's problematic. But if you can become friend with the monkey mind, guide it gently, observe it without getting tangled.
It becomes more workable.
Exactly. It becomes pliable and walkable, free of constraints, and not sticky. This allows for openness, creativity, insight. He mentions analytical meditation involving critical thinking and how monks in debate learn to engage intensely without getting stuck in rumination, even when provoked. It's about training mental agility, not just silence.
So pulling this together, the science seems to show the brain actively constructing our experience, influenced by our attention and relationship to our thoughts and feelings. This resonates strongly with the philosophical ideas.
It really does. And Michel Bitbol takes us even further, looking at the limits of science itself through phenomenology. He returns to this idea of the blind spot of science. Science, in its drive for objectivity, often inadvertently simplifies things by disregarding or cutting out himself, his own personality, namely the subject of cognizance.
The observer is left out of the picture.
Pretty much. As Schrödinger pointed out, this makes things easier but leaves enormous lacunae, gaps, and paradoxes, especially when we try to fit consciousness back into the objective picture science creates. We ignore the very ground consciousness from which science arises.
So how do we address this blind spot?
Bitbol champions phenomenology, the study of lived experience. Instead of starting with an assumed objective world, it starts with the incontrovertible fact of experience itself, our subjective awareness, and works backward to understand its condition of possibility. It acknowledges that all descriptions, whether everyday language or complex math, like differential geometry mapping onto Husserl's descriptions of experiencing a body, are partial perspectives within experience.
And he sees parallels between this and quantum physics.
Yes, but in a specific way. He argues that the deep connection between quantum physics and Buddhism isn't that they both reveal the world as it is independently of us. Rather, their shared innovation is a criticism of the very idea that such an independent, objective view is even possible.
So quantum theory isn't a picture of reality, but
more like a guide, as Bitbol puts it, for how to better gamble on the personal consequences of their actions. It emphasizes contextuality. The outcome depends on how you measure. Phenomena aren't pre-existing, they are produced by the experiment. The weirdness disappears if we drop the assumption of a fully objective world existing independent of our interaction with it.
It originates in our assumptions about objectivity.
That's his argument. The mystery arises from assuming a spectator view of a pre-existing world, rather than seeing ourselves as participants whose actions co-create phenomena. And ultimately, Bitbol stresses the need for balance between first-person experience and third-person science, drawing on Varela's work. He distinguishes cognition and mind as processes involving brain, body, and environment, while the embodied brain is the structure. They are two sides of a coin.
And trying to reduce one to the other doesn't work.
He argues it's fallacious.
Yeah.
The subjective aspect, our lived experience, is always going to be popping its head up.
Right.
We can try to ignore it or explain it away, but it remains the fundamental ground. We need both perspectives.
Okay, so we've covered some deep philosophical ground and looked at fascinating neuroscience. The big question now is, how do we actually experience this? How do we move from understanding non-duality intellectually to feeling it, living it?
Exactly. This is where the practical insights from Judson Brewer, Richard Davidson, and Zoran Josipovic are so valuable. They offer concrete ways to cultivate this awareness.
Brewer's three-step behavior change framework seems like a great starting point. Can you recap that?
Sure. First, become aware of being caught up in a habit loop. Just notice it, the trigger, the behavior, the result. Like, oh, I'm feeling stressed, reaching for cookies, behavior, feeling guilty and still stressed, result. Second, really explore the results. Ask, what am I really getting from this? This often leads to disenchantment. Maybe you realize the cookie doesn't actually help, or the cigarette tastes awful. That lack of reward weakens the loop. Third, bring in mindfulness practices as an alternative, more rewarding way to handle the trigger.
And instead of external rewards, Brewer emphasizes curiosity.
Yes. He calls curiosity the bigger, better offer. It's intrinsically rewarding. Ask yourself, what feels better, curiosity or a craving? Curiosity or anxiety? When you get genuinely curious about what a craving or anxiety feels like in your body, just exploring the raw sensations, it naturally feels more engaging and less distressing than being stuck in the craving or worry loop.
And it's always available, right?
Always available. Calorie-free, as he says. It helps you step out of trying to fix things externally and find satisfaction just by paying attention differently. It's a shift in relationship.
So it's not about forcing things to be different.
Not at all. Brewer stresses effortless doing. True mindfulness isn't about gritting your teeth and forcing awareness. It's about tapping into that intrinsic motivation, like curiosity. It means welcoming in our present moment experience, whatever it is, pleasant or unpleasant, and learning to relate to our experience differently. Not making bad feelings go away, but changing how we meet them.
Like Rumi's Guest House poem he references, welcoming all emotions.
Exactly, welcoming them as messengers. This non-resistance allows difficult energy to move through instead of getting stuck.
He gave that powerful example of the patient with panic attacks.
Right. Instead of fighting the panic or obsessing over why it was happening, the patient simply brought mindful, curious awareness to the physical sensations of panic. Feeling the heart race, the tightness.
And it just melted away.
Looking inside made it just melt away. Shifting from resistance and analysis to open awareness changed the whole experience. The reward became inner peace, not escape.
And he also connects this to flow states.
Yeah, those times you're in the zone, totally absorbed, that involves a merging of self and object. The sense of a separate doer fades. These states are joyful, the opposite of anxiety, and meditation naturally cultivates that same quality of merging and presence.
So how do we actively cultivate these states? How do we actually change our brains? That seems to be where Richard Davidson and Zoran Josipovic come in.
Precisely. Davidson's work on neuroplasticity is incredibly hopeful. He emphasizes that our brains are built to change in response to experience and in response to training.
We're not stuck.
We're not stuck where we are. Even brief, regular mental exercises, a few minutes a day, done consistently, can make a real difference in brain structure and function, supporting well-being. It's like mental fitness.
What are the key areas he suggests focusing on, his 4 pillars?
Right. His framework includes 1, awareness, knowing what your mind is doing, catching mind wandering. 2, connection, cultivating positive social qualities like kindness, empathy, appreciation. 3, insight, understanding your own mind, changing your relationship to thoughts and beliefs, seeing they're not solid facts. And 4, purpose, having a sense of meaning and direction bigger than yourself. These work together.
He gives that simple appreciation exercise for connection.
Yes, just bringing someone to mind who's been helpful, reflecting on what they did, and really letting yourself feel that sense of appreciation, maybe even expressing it. It's about actively seeing the good around us, especially when it's easy to focus on the negative. This simple practice can literally shift your brain towards more positive states.
And he suggests treating mental health like dental health.
Yeah, prioritizing it daily. Even practicing mindfulness for the couple of minutes you spend brushing your teeth, little moments add up.
Zoran Josipovic adds another layer, distinguishing mind and awareness.
He does. He talks about the mind that creates experience, the thinking narrative mind, versus awareness, which is just like a mirror, simply reflecting what's happening without getting involved or judging. He also offers that interesting scientific perspective. Maybe spirituality and spiritual beliefs are consciousness trying to find itself, an inherent drive towards self-understanding.
And he links this to different brain networks.
Right. The experiential network, focused on the present moment and direct sensation, is the alternative to the default network, the mind-wandering Michel. Activating that experiential network is linked to brainwave changes, less beta, focused thinking, more alpha, calm alertness, and gamma, integration insight. And this correlates with experiences of no self-unity consciousness. So there's a measurable neural signature.
That's incredible. What are some practical ways he suggests engaging this experiential network, getting out of our heads and into our bodies?
He offers several somatic practices. Things like simultaneously holding those opposing experiences, like feeling your breath and hearing sounds, or consciously relaxing the mouth, the eyes, the ears, the hands, the feet, noticing and releasing tension. Also, feeling both sides of the body simultaneously to enhance grounded presence, and becoming aware of the space around and inside the body, expanding your sense of awareness beyond just the physical outline. These pull you into direct, non-conceptual feeling.
And it doesn't take years of practice to see changes.
Apparently not. He mentions research showing even as many as 8, 10, 12 periods of sitting meditation can begin to alter the structures of the brain. Consistency seems key, little and often. And fascinatingly, with experienced monks, their brains stay lit up in these experiential networks, even when they're not actively meditating. It becomes a trait. Their default mode shifts.
That's really encouraging. What's his key tip for practicing these things effectively?
Practice in low-risk times. Don't wait until you're completely overwhelmed or triggered. Build the skill when you're relatively calm, so the neural pathways are there when you need them. And crucially, when you notice your mind has wandered, every time you pop out of one of those thought states, notice, celebrate. Don't beat yourself up. Reward the noticing itself. That encourages the brain to return to awareness gently.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the core takeaway? We've journeyed through some pretty complex philosophy and neuroscience. What's the unifying truth here?
I think it's that this feeling of being a separate self, cut off from the world and others, it seems to be, fundamentally, an illusion constructed by our minds and brains. A very convincing one, but an illusion nonetheless.
And understanding this isn't just intellectual gymnastics.
Not at all. It has real consequences. So much of our suffering, anxiety, addiction, conflict seems tied to this illusion of separation. But the amazing news from the science is that our brains are plastic. These patterns aren't fixed. We can change our relationship to ourselves and the world through awareness and practice.
I love Jay Garfield's metaphor for this realization. The initial terror of jumping off a cliff, losing that solid ground of self, transforming into the most liberating, amazing feeling of flying.
Yes, it's not falling into nothingness. It's realizing the freedom that comes when you let go of those rigid, illusory boundaries. The groundlessness is the freedom.
And this isn't just for monks or philosophers.
Absolutely not. This understanding offers a radical shift that can deeply impact anyone's well-being, relationships, and how we navigate life. It fosters empathy, connection, wisdom. Neuroplasticity tells us change is possible, even with small, consistent steps.
So it leaves us with a provocative thought. If our sense of self is, as Hume suggested, a kind of fiction we collectively make up, what new realities, what new ways of being might we make up if we consciously chose to dissolve those boundaries we've always taken for granted? What liberation might await you when you realize you're not falling, but flying? Something to consider as you go about your day.